Welcome to The Rubber Meets the Road Economics, the podcast where we explore the driving forces behind today's economy and their real-world implications. Join investor Hunter Craig as he interviews Professor Edwin Burton from the University of Virginia, delving into the complexities of economics with clarity and insight. Whether you're an economics enthusiast or just curious about how economic policies affect your daily life, you're in the right place. Let's get started.
Today is December 4th, 2024. We're here with renowned economics professor at the University of Virginia, Ed Burton. Welcome, Professor.
Happy to be here, Hunter.
The Federal Reserve meets 2 weeks from today on December 18th to determine interest rates. 2-month, 3-month or below 4.5%. What will the Fed do on December 18th?
Assuming the rates stay where they are, that is the Treasury bill rates, which are the 2 and 3 month and 6 months as well, or below 4.5%. They'll bring the target range for the federal funds down to 4.25 to 0.5. It's currently 4.5 to 3/4. They'll bring it down 25 basis points to 4.25 to 0.5. The only thing that would upset that apple cart is a jump in short-term rates in the Treasury market between now and then, which is highly unlikely. That almost never happens. It could happen, but assuming rates stay where they are, and there's no big change, or they go lower in the T-bill market, you're going to see 25 basis points. You will not see 50, so it just kind of depends on where it is. But come, say, 2 days before they make the call, just look at the T-bill markets. Look at the 2, 3 month, 6 month yield. If they're under 4.5, you know what's going to happen. 25 basis point cut happens every time.
Professor, everybody's talking about tariffs. President-elect is talking about 100% tariffs on goods coming from Mexico and Canada. Are tariffs good for the economy, and are they inflationary?
Tariffs are not particularly inflationary, but they're invariably bad. They hurt the country that puts them on, and they hurt the country that is forced to deal with them when they try to sell their products into the country. Now, the Trump administration has a different take on this, and their take on this is that tariffs are a weapon to get people to do other things. For example, Trump has already announced 25% tariffs on Mexico and Canada with the idea that that will encourage them to reduce the flow of people and drugs across the border. So far, it looks like he's getting his way to a certain extent because both Mexico and Canada have made signals, Mexico by its actions and Canada by its words, that they're going to take heed and make some efforts in the direction of appeasing Trump on the borders, both borders, in terms of people and drugs. It may not be enough, and we'll see when Trump gets in the White House whether he follows through, but they're paying attention. There's no question that when he announced those. Now, that's very different than Trump's policy toward China. Toward China, he looks at the huge manufacturing operation in China and says, hey, that used to be here in the U.S., or maybe that belongs here in the U.S. And the only way we could get more manufacturing, he says, is to put up a tariff wall, and then we won't import those cheap Chinese manufactured goods. We'll make them here in the U.S. The problem with all of that is if two countries trade with one another, the country that's importing something, one country's importing and stuff, and they're exporting other stuff. If you're importing something, you're always hurting your domestic manufacturers of whatever that is. But that happens within the U.S. If Texas is a better cattle producer than Louisiana and can produce it cheaper, they'll put the Louisiana cattle guys out of business. That's what happens. And they'll become the net exporters of cattle, and somebody else will import them, who probably their cattle industry will disappear. Nobody complains about that much within the U.S., where we don't have tariff walls between Texas and Louisiana. But there's a big hue and cry when you're dealing with a foreign country, and all of a sudden you're importing something that's a lot cheaper in that foreign country than you can do it on your own. And because people lose jobs. Detroit, for example, is threatened. I don't think the Detroit auto industry can survive with or without tariffs. But the whole idea of tariffs against China and others is to protect Detroit and other places. And we've seen what happens if you don't. The textile industry in the Southeast, the furniture industry in Southeast America, Greensboro used to own the world in furniture. Now they're fighting for survival. And all the textile operations have disappeared throughout the Southeast. Remember the Milliken down in South Carolina and others? Now, the right policy really is to identify those areas that you're going to lose, because you can tell. Sooner or later, there won't be an auto industry in Detroit. And if people can't see that, they're not paying any attention to the signals. And what you should plan on is, how about spending some money on Detroit infrastructure or encouraging businesses in Detroit to do other things that are going to make up the difference? In other words, take the funding that you have and direct it toward communities that have been hurt. Here in Virginia, for example, when Danville lost the company that was right there on the Dan River, right in the heart of Danville, 15,000 people lost their jobs overnight. And all of a sudden, we had an unemployment level in Danville of nearly 30%. That was a time when somebody should do some thinking about what can we put in Danville to help the citizens of Danville recover, and direct some of the things that end up other places right into Danville. And you can do that. People say they don't have the educated labor force. You can solve that problem. All these problems and excuses people have for not helping communities that have been disadvantaged are not true. They can be helped, and problems can be overcome. But you know how the world works. The way the world works is all the money ends up getting spent in all the rich areas, further perpetuating these differences that we see in income and wealth. So back to the original subject. The original subject was tariffs. If you get rid of all of your tariffs, you're better off, even if the country you're trading with keeps its tariffs. It's for the same reason that if you're down on the corner and you have red and blue marbles and you see somebody that's got a green marble that you want and you want to trade them, you may drive a hard bargain, but that may be the only green marble out there, and you might have to trade more blue marbles and red marbles than you think. Might not be a fair trade, but it's a trade you want to do. Often a trade you want to do is not a fair trade. I'm sure you've done a few of those in your lifetime, Hunter. I know I certainly have. But prohibiting that kind of trade or putting some barrier between it hurts everybody. It hurts you. It hurts me. And I think here's my main objection to tariffs. If you're in the habit of protecting your industries with tariffs, then you end up with a lot of inefficient industries. You end up with things like the U.S. auto industry that has to be bailed out every decade or so. Or the old steel industry would have to be all kinds of gymnastics, financial gymnastics, to keep alive something that can't compete. Look, if China can produce electric vehicles for $11,000 of the same quality that it takes $40,000 in this country to produce, by all means, let's buy the Chinese electric vehicles. That's good for everybody. You're not long run going to be able to protect an inefficient industry or one that can't compete globally. Develop the industries that can compete globally. We certainly have a lot of strength in technology, artificial intelligence, there's all kinds of things. And people can be trained to work in those industries. The world's not stagnant. You know, it's so funny how people are so convinced that there are smart people and dumb people in this world. No, that's not the way the world is. There are people that work hard and get an education and other people that don't. And the people that work hard and get an education and learn skills, they're viewed as smart people. But anybody can do that. My experience with students over the last 50 years is there's no such thing as a smart student and a dumb student. There's a difference in work habits and work ethic, but there's not a whole lot of difference in ability. If you apply and work hard, you can develop increased ability. Athletics is maybe the best example. If somebody wants to be a great football player, maybe they better go to the gym and lift a few weights and run around the track a little bit. That's what it takes. And learning stuff is exactly the same. You know, it may take me longer than it takes you to learn a specific thing. That might be. But if I work hard enough at it, there's nothing I can't learn, and there's nothing you can't learn. And that's true of every single person. We don't see that often enough.
Speaking of learning, if gas prices spike, prices go up, is that inflationary, or is inflation solely the devaluation of the dollar?
Inflation is just the currency devaluation. That's all it is. It's what can the dollar buy? And if you don't really change the amount of money in your system and all you do is have changes in demand for different products, that's not going to be inflationary. It could be temporarily. You see the price level go up, but then it'll go right back down later. There's no reason to expect the value of your currency unit to depend on whether there's excess demand in the oil market or anything like that. And back to tariffs, we didn't mention this, but tariffs are not inflationary. That's a big bugaboo. It's funny to see Janet Yellen saying that when she thought massive increases in the money supply weren't going to be inflationary. She didn't think that was an issue, but she seems to think tariffs are. Tariffs aren't going to create inflation. They're going to create a loss in wealth. If we put up tariffs with China and they retaliate, both countries will lose some wealth. They'll lose some GDP they could have had. It's a damaging thing for both countries. We shouldn't be doing it. I have a little more sympathy for Trump's view that you can use a tariff to accomplish some other objectives. It depends on what the other objectives are. If Trump can actually use the threat of a 25% tariff to stop the flow of people and drugs coming across the Mexican and Canadian border, I think that's probably good if he can pull that off. But then hopefully it'll work and there won't be any tariffs. If it works, there won't be any 25% tariffs and everybody wins.
Professor, U.S. GDP is just shy of $29 trillion. We're running a $2 trillion deficit annually. Can you speak to federal and state spending as a percentage of GDP and the net effect on that on the economy?
Well, the latest data, at least for the year ending this summer, the fiscal year, shows about in the neighborhood of $7 trillion spent by the national government and $3.7 trillion by state and local. So if you put all that together, it's nearly $11 trillion. So if you divide 11 by 29, you get 37%. So the government represents, at least by those numbers, 37% of gross national product. The deficit is a little bit different story. That just reached $36 trillion, well above our national income of our GDP of $29 trillion. It hasn't been that high since the end of World War II. And at the end of the World War II, there was a simple way to cut it. Quit building planes, tanks, and sending people all around the world. And we quit doing that, and guess what? We ran essentially budget surpluses right on up to John Kennedy's inauguration in 1961. And the national debt didn't move. It stayed right at $300 billion, and as a percentage of GDP, it fell dramatically. We don't have that available now, because if you look where the money's spending, where the money is being spent, it's on things that are not possible to turn around unless you want to get rid of Social Security and Medicare and quit paying interest on the national debt. Those are the three biggest items. You're not going to save a lot of money getting rid of the education department or the transportation department. Now, I think those are both good ideas, by the way, but you're not going to save a lot of money doing them. There might be other reasons to do them, but not necessarily with the idea that you're going to save an enormous amount of money. I don't envy the role that Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy have in front of them. Hopefully, if they could save us a few $100 million, more power to them. But there are a lot of things the government does that maybe they shouldn't be doing, Hunter. For example, how good is your mail delivery? It might be best to think about letting the private market do that. You have a lot of things out there, FedEx, UPS, whatever, who probably would like to compete for that business, and maybe we ought to open that up. Just lots of things. There are just lots of things the government currently does. Maybe one should take a look at privatizing a lot of them, because the one institution that does the best job of creating the best products at the lowest price for the consumer is the free market. Government never is able to quite accomplish that. So it would be good to take some of the government functions and begin to ask yourself, why are we spending this much money doing this? One is in healthcare. Well, we talked earlier about how much medical expenditures are spent in the last years of people's lives. In the last 2 years, that's a huge amount of the medical expenditures in America. And I think people should think hard whether if it was their own money, they would be doing that. If somebody told me, hey, you've got 2 more days to live, and if you give me $1 million, I'll keep you going for 2 days, I know what my answer would be right away. I'd say, you kidding me? That $1 million going to my grandkids, not to you. I've had a great life. And I think a lot of people feel like I do about that. If you were spending your own money, you'd be spending your children's money and your grandchildren's money. And in effect, you are. But you just don't see it that way because of the way all this stuff is paid through Medicare and Medicaid and whatever. We got to quit spending our children and grandchildren's money so that we get to breathe an extra 24 hours. That's unfair, and it's not something I think we would willingly do if we face those costs on our own.
Thank you, Professor. A lot going on in interest rates. I can't wait to see if you're right.
Thank you, Hunter. Always a pleasure.
Thank you for joining us for the Rubber Meets the Road Economics podcast. If you enjoyed the discussion, remember to subscribe and stay updated with future episodes. Join us soon for more conversations about modern economics on the Rubber Meets the Road Economics podcast.